Hey, welcome everyone to reading number, I believe I'm going to say six. That's right. Of the LaRouche document from 2002, Economics at the End of a Delusion. We've been through a lot of stuff. Today, we're going to start with reading a poem. And I think that'll sort of set the tone of everyone's mind to receive the general conceptions and the spirit of those conceptions as we begin to read this otherwise very dense bit of text. Always hold in mind too, whenever reading a document like this, to always think not about what is he saying, but why is he saying what he's saying? Why is he formulating the choices that he's making to maybe draw a parallel or a metaphor or create an ambiguity the way he's doing it? What's the intention? Because you'll find that rarely, if ever, I don't think there's ever anything out of place. Everything is done with a form of design, even though there is ambiguity a lot. And that's, again, an intention. So always think about that. How is he thinking? Why is he thinking? Why is he generating the thoughts he's doing and making those choices? And that's actually something to do when you're listening to or reading anybody, frankly. That's just good advice. Whether you're listening to a piece of music or a poem or a piece of literature that you're reading, it's always good just to think, what is the artist trying to actually say when he's making the choices to compose this melody at this moment, right? And sometimes there's a good reason, sometimes there's a crappy reason. But either way, you'll usually get somewhere interesting if you're always asking the question, well, how is the artist, how is the creator of this work thinking? And get that vicariously going. So today we're going to start with the poem, like I said. I'm going to do a little screen share. Where can everyone see the poem? Can make it a little bit bigger. No, I can't make it bigger. Can people see that? Yeah, okay. So last week we briefly mentioned, I brought up the question of Paul Laurence Dunbar, an African-American poet in the late 1890s, early 20th century. He died young. I think he was maybe 30 or so. Friend of the Wright brothers too. The Wright brothers actually bankrolled his poetry career early on, which is an interesting little parallel as far as the science and art false dualism that we're trying to shatter. So this is a particular poem that I've really enjoyed. Oh yeah, there it is. He was born in 1872 and he died in 1906. So who would like to, maybe Paul, would you like to read this slowly? And we'll just maybe have a quick discussion about what is this unexpressed? What is the topic of the poem that he's thinking about?
Sure. Unexpressed. Deep in my heart that aches with the repression and strives with plenitude of bitter pain, there lives a thought that clamours for expression and spends its undelivered force in vain. What boots it that some other may have thought it? The right of thought's expression is divine. The price of pain I pay for it has bought it. I care not who lays claim to it, it is mine. And yet not mine until it be delivered, the manner of its birth shall prove the test. Alas, alas, my rock of pride is shivered, I beat my brow, the thought still unexpressed.
Is this just a poem of a creative writer's block and a poet that he's just angry about, or what do you guys think is the topic of the what is this unexpressed thought that he's striving for, trying to express? Not that there's a right answer necessarily. I have my hypotheses, but what do you guys think he's talking about?
I think he's talking about where the thought comes from.
Where the what?
Where it originates.
Where what originates?
The thought.
The thought.
There lives a thought that clamours for expression.
So he's definitely thinking about
force in vain.
Mm-hmm. But I think he's talking about, well, what is because he's referring to it as there lives a thought that clamors for expression. So there is a thought that clamors for expression. So I think he does mean that there's a specific type of thought that is clamoring for expression, not just where it comes from.
Yeah, the right of thought's expression is divine.
That's a fact he's laying out. So it deserves to be expressed because it's right to be expressed as a divine right. And it is a specific type of thought that's yearning to be expressed. But what is that thought that's trying to be expressed, do you guys think?
I don't know
I
what it
see.
is. It's frustrating to him though.
Yeah.
It hurts him because he can't express it.
Mhm.
I see his struggle most peaked in the last three lines where he talks about the he acknowledges the divine source of the thought and acknowledges that the thought only takes shape when he expresses it, brings it to ground or puts it out there, and he's frustrated in that he hasn't expressed it yet, or is afraid that he's not going to express it right. Maybe I'm projecting myself into that, but
Well, we all kind of do. It's all a bit of a subjective, objective dance, right?
Very much
absolutely.
I also get the impression he recognizes it's bars of his own making that are preventing him from expressing it.
What part of the text do you get that sense that it's in his own making that he's being prevented from expressing it?
There's a few references when he's talking about pride, the price of pain, and kind of what that effect is there. So it's one of these things where he doesn't come out and say it explicitly. To me, it's laced throughout what he's saying. And my initial reaction in terms of coming up with that interpretation was far more based on the feeling that was coming across from the poem rather than initially any kind of rational analysis of what is he trying to get across. So when I came out and said that, I hadn't yet picked the thing apart, right, and tried to come up with something super scientific or anything like that. It really came across as a feeling first, and looking at it a little more closely, the most precise I can get at this moment is just pointing to a few of those things.
I think you're definitely onto something, and that's definitely the first way we interact with a poem is through the general feeling that we get as an aura before you can really like sit down and take it apart. But I think you're touching on something.
I'm not so sure he wants to put it into words either. It could be something besides like a poem. It could be a painting or maybe like a work of art, because as he's talking about its manner of birth.
Well, I think he definitely wants to. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think he's a poet, and I think he does want to express something in a poetic form.
So what would he mean by birth?
Well, you're
his individual expression, I venture. Matt, I have a question on what does the word boots in the
old expression from the back in the day? Just what boots it? Who cares that some other may have thought it?
Okay,
so, because I remember to say this thought or to express this thought. Other people might have. So everyone wants to be original, but who cares if other people have said it or have expressed it? It doesn't mean I shouldn't express it too.
Because I remember in Shakespeare, and I think it's in Julius Caesar, there's a reference to bootless heel, which I learned is vain, or a vain effort.
This context, what boots it that some other may have thought it in that context, it just means who cares that some other may have thought it.
Okay.
It's like an expression, just a colloquial expression of those days.
Again, totally subjective. We can't help it be that way. But one of the things that comes across to me is that he's talking about something external, which I interpret to be coming to him via intuition in the end. The manner of its birth shall prove the test.
Mm-hmm. And what he means by birth, which is something kind of internal. I mean, it's coming out of somebody in a sense, but the idea of conception too, like to conceive of an idea derives from the idea of birthing, right? To conceive is typically something that is associated with giving birth to. So the fact that we associate it with new thoughts being created says something about how the language, how the human mind created language and uses it over the years. But I think that there's this opening part too that got me to, like, deep in my heart that aches with the repression, and so you have already an association of something being repressed upon him, on his heart, and it's aching, and there's a striving, but it's a bitter pain that this something is striving for in spite of the pain. So there's all this going on.
Can't quite identify it.
Yeah.
He's not even sure what it is, maybe.
I can relate to the first part. If there's a plenitude of bitter pain for me, it's every time I, really spend time investigating science. I'm not a trained scientist, for example, and kind of wish that I had a much, much better understanding of all of the things that I look at. I mean, I try as hard as I can and everything like that, but there are certain things that you just, I really have to dive a lot deeper before I have an understanding of these things, before I would have an understanding of these things.
Yeah.
Everyone here read Plato's Dialogues, or any of Plato's Dialogues?
Yeah.
3 years.
Yeah.
Read that recently.
The fun thing about Plato's Dialogues is they're always about something that is very universal, like virtue or honor or justice or piety. These very big ideas that are difficult to crystallize and define in a closed way. So the interesting thing when you read the Plato's Dialogues is they have these themes, they're never fully defined. He takes you through a lot of paradoxes. He takes you through a lot of thought experiments to try to figure out what it isn't, so you have a better idea of what it might be, but he never tells you what it is. You're always kind of left kind of aching for the right answer, but never being given it. But you're always sort of left also in a better state to think about it than you were at the beginning of the journey before you read the dialogue.
He encourages you to try out your idea or your hypothesis you've come up with at the end of the dialogue. It reminds me of books they used when we were younger. The teacher had all the answers in the back of her or his. They never gave students editions with more than half, so they could encourage students to learn, but they wouldn't get all the answers. And I think that's Plato's Dialogues are like that in a great way.
I know Jesus even speaks that, and when you read his words in the Bible, he talks about the kingdom of God, but he never describes it. It's always like this, or he'll skirt around it, but he'll never actually say what it is.
Yeah. And I would say that maybe when I read that poem, there's a line from Shakespeare which is very well known, okay, that is spontaneous for me, okay, is to be or not to be. And I think it has to do with something around that, to be or not to be, okay? And the third line, there lives a thought that clamors for expression. I think that we have to see the word thought in a very big way, okay? It's not only one word or one sentence. I have the envy to replace thought by universal representation, okay? Am I capable to give birth to that understanding of universe, which that is my understanding of the universe?
Yeah.
Yep.
It also sounds like the poem has two discordant threads running through it. There's one thread of creation and of the divine and creativity in that. And there's the other, which is the pain, where perhaps he gets to the underlying source of it, and he points to pride and, what could be called the deadliest sin. And around the middle, you're seeing, at least for me, perhaps a little bit of the conflict there, right? When he says, I care not who lays claim to it, it is mine. So I'm seeing these two notes that are going through the poem.
Right.
And yet not mine until it be delivered.
Yeah, I can't separate that line from the one above.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it cannot be his until he travel the journey by himself, because it's written that what was it that some other may have thought it. Okay, so in his mind, he's not the first one, and he's not the first traveler, okay, in this universe. But he would have to travel himself the path, the way, so he can claim it for himself.
Mhm.
Yes.
Oh, I'm thinking, like, yeah, we all have these thoughts, but a lot of our thoughts we can't express. We can't deliver them. We can't deliver those thoughts, and he wants to deliver this particular thought. And then once it's delivered, then you can claim it as your own.
There's definitely a light darkness quality, that's for sure. I mean, it could be, but that's the thing, right? Like, I know oftentimes when you're about to set about creating something that you haven't begun yet, you sometimes have an ambition, which when you begin a work, you realize that maybe you're not actually equipped to actualize this ambition that you had going into something, and it's frustrating, you know. And it could be a variety of things. It could be wisdom. Maybe it was he wanted to write something which would express the beauty of wisdom or truth. Maybe it was freedom. Maybe it was it could be a variety of things, right? Maybe it was justice. Who knows? Could have been a lot. But there's definitely something internal within him that was keeping it from happening, and maybe something external as well was keeping it from happening. Maybe it was both.
Yeah. I'm probably too obsessed by Plato and by the allegory of the cave, but I would say that it's Dunbar's creation of the allegory of the cave. Going back to the allegory, the traveler has to go to the Son of the Absolute first, and after that he will go back to the cave. He would express it for others.
I would just say, like, one thing just to hold in mind too always is to ask the question of the life and identity of an artist who's creating something, because they also had a self-conception of what purpose they saw for themselves, and that would probably come through at least in a lot of their artworks. And keep in mind as well, Paul Laurence Dunbar his parents were both born slaves. He was the first free person born in that family, and his whole life was really devoted to trying to emancipate humanity, especially his people, but really, I mean, people of all colors, from ignorance. So I mean, there's that moral sort of drive that you'll find in the course of his life. And he's also a young, somewhat romantic personality, type 2, very strong, passionate person. So all of these things would come through. Who's, like, again, very young, like he's still just learning how to.
African poet. For some reason, the word freedom popped into my head. The idea that what he's looking for is to understand what freedom means to him.
Gauss.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I got that. That was sort of my heart is wired in that direction too. But again, it's not necessarily that. It's not necessarily freedom. But I'm thinking that's my preference, my preferred hypothesis right now. But again, it might be something more that's maybe just connected to freedom, but something more rich as an idea. Even I don't really know. But I don't think we should really try to solidify it 100%. But I just wanted us to get into that motion of just thinking about an ambiguity less imperfectly before jumping into the text.
Yeah, but that's precisely, I think, the lesson in quotation mark of a poem. You can have many layers of interpretation, and I think that the biographical interpretation is not to be rejected, but not to be considered at the outmost ultimate interpretation either.
There's a term for that, Kwan. It's called paranasomia,
Really? Repeat that?
It's called paranasomia. I'm not sure that I'm pronouncing it properly, but it refers to a lot of ancient writings
Okay.
that have an intentional double meaning.
Okay. Very interesting. Can you write it in the chat, please?
I'll do my best.
Thank you, Paul. Well, let's begin today's reading. I got a couple of other little mini videos to just amplify a certain idea or two that he's going to throw out soon. Who would like to read today slowly? It's this, the directed self-perfecting process of a system, which is open, not closed, and open because it can always generate more energy than it is consuming in a time function because it is getting better. So that quality of change isn't just random change, because you have the other type of change, which is like, the shit happens change, of just like things just flow. No, not bounded by any principles of morality, of better or worse, they just flow, or they decay. That's the other type of change, is the entropic idea that things are organized, are changing according to a direction, but that the direction is ultimately towards things always getting worse, to the point of let's say, heat death of the universe or something. The anti-entropic idea is the superior form of change, because it's change that's constant, but it's constantly moving in a direction that is getting better.
Yeah.
Very, very different.
One easy way to reread that sentence is to substitute anti-entropic with the words anti-chaotic. Random chaotic change.
You could.
That's what entropy is.
Yeah. The increasing rates of chaos.
Yeah.
Rather than
that, heading in a more directed way.
The question is, if it's decreasing in the rates of chaos, then it's moving towards an increased rate of order. And if we define, does that not mean we're moving towards a crystallized state of perfect order and symmetry, where things will eventually just no longer change because they'll be just so ordered that they won't, could that be a danger then, as an ambiguity of that idea?
If we let it,
I'm taking a
becomes a
simplistic
danger.
approach using the word chaos.
Was that Peter?
I think if we let it, it can become a danger, because, just with reference to the preamble of the United States Constitution, we're striving to make this a more perfect union, and that states on its face that our job is to make it more perfect, but not accept that there will be a perfection in the future. Because if we stay, okay, it's perfect, we stop, then we become entropic, and
it's always open.
lose.
Exactly.
It's always open. I mean, if we say it's perfect, then it becomes closed.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to think about it. It's a very good way to think about it. And as far as the question of ontological paradoxes leading to universal principle, does anybody have an example of something that he might be thinking about?
Breaking up badly, Matt.
Could you repeat that sentence, Matt?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I just said so, and I'm so sorry, guys. My connection on Wednesday nights here is so bad for some reason. When he described here an ontological paradox, a cognitive action which proceeds from an ontological paradox to an experimentally defined universal physical principle. Does somebody have an example that might come to their mind of something that would showcase what he's saying in general terms? Oh, I got one, and I'm going to show a video after of another one.
Well, why not the planetary movement as defined by Kepler?
Great one. It's a great one. How does the paradox fit into that? Where's the paradox?
Well, the paradox is, okay, I read again the sentence, okay, is knowledge of the type of cognitive action which proceeds from ontological paradox to experimentally define universal physical principle. Okay, so the paradox here is how to explain the movement of the planet at the same time by a unifying unifying principle, okay, by harmony precisely. Because I remember that last time we discussed the epicycles, who are simply sense perception description of the movement of the planets, which are becoming heavier and heavier. Okay, that would be the low level, and it would give the paradox because okay, a paradox fundamentally is a apparent contradiction. Okay, how come is it possible that the universe with its harmony can give something so absurd and so heavy? Okay, you go from that paradox, and the type of cognitive action precisely is what we discussed last time, is to have that creative leap using the metaphor of harmony, okay? Musical harmony to harmony of movement of the planets. So there is a beauty in both the sound of the musical composition and the movement of the planets. So that is the leap of cognitive action using a metaphoric transfer for creativity. And from there, to create the laws of the movement, which is the part called experimentally defined universal physical principle.
That's good. Yeah, that's a quick example. A small example I was thinking about would have been like the idea of X-rays, which were discovered when there was like there's like William Roentgen was a guy who was working on he was trying to figure out certain properties of light, and in his laboratory it was all dark one day, and he had some fluorescent material, and it was blocked by a wall of cardboard, and he thought that he turned his device off that was emitting light, and yet for some reason, though he reduced it, he thought it was off. He looked at his fluorescent object, and it was like glowing. And he's like, how is that possible? There's no light that should be hitting it, even though it's glowing. And so that was a paradox, right? Nothing is hitting it. There's no visible light, but it's glowing. And then he discovered, okay, there was actually a property of light that was lower than what his eyes could see, or higher than what his eyes could see, beyond ultraviolet, which was passing through the cardboard separation that was blocking this little object. And it was hitting the object and causing this reaction that created like a chemical optical reaction, which then became discovered. He did more tests. My connection is so unstable.
And I would call that he saw an anomaly.
A paradox was something that didn't fit according to an observable process in reality that didn't fit his logical system of explanation, right? No existing knowledge.
Something out of place.
Exactly, something out of place that it caused his idea to be enriched by a new discovery and then applied to, as we know, X-rays have transformed so much of how we interface with the universe and ourselves. There's so many examples.
Let's split that word up, paradox. I mean, it comes from two Greek words. I mean, I looked ahead at Oxford, but dox means glory. Para, I think it means maybe
Dox has more than glory, but I'm quite sure that it can mean glory too, because doxa means a common belief or opinion, if you want.
Yeah.
So a paradoxa is beyond the common belief or beyond the usual opinions.
Sure. Like paranormal,
beyond the appearance
normal,
or
exactly.
I interpret it as sort of.
In each instance, in turn, the discovery of the principle demonstrated by the physical experiment was introduced for experimental study by a preceding hypothesis. This hypothesis was provoked in the sovereign cognitive process of individual minds by scrutiny of experimental evidence of an ontological paradox. Now, respecting those processes of cognition within which all of these discoveries of principle occur, cognition itself has internal laws, which are laws in the same sense that we define laws discovered to operate within the respectively abiotic and probiotic domains. The nature of those laws internal to the efficient forms of cognitive relations among individuals are most readily identified by comparing the principles of classical forms of artistic composition and performance to certain intrinsic failures incurred by the very nature of the violation of an otherwise more or less indispensable and comprehensive mathematical physics or Riemannian. Continue, Matt.
No, I actually wanted to, and I hope that I'm intelligible. It's so frustrating to have such a bad
Much better.
connection. It's much better for now, maybe.
Yeah, much better.
Okay, fingers crossed. Yeah, I'd run to another computer and I couldn't get it working even. So, all right, we're gonna stick this one out. So the things that I just pulled up a video, two little mini videos to just illustrate that I found were useful enough online that would illustrate some of the points that he had brought up regarding paradoxes that arise in simple experimental tests that generated some major breakthroughs in humanity's experience. One of which is, as he mentions, the question of quickest time by Fermat. Pierre de Fermat was a 17th century, 17th century scientist who discovered that there's a certain property to light's behavior moving through what seems to be space. And light moving through space, obviously there's many things you could see, but he was on the cutting edge of those who realized that it wasn't happening at infinite, that there was a finiteness to the speed of light. Although it was incredibly fast, it had just been discovered, and provably so, that it was a limited speed. I think it's like 330,000 miles per second or something ridiculously fast. But when you...
300 million meters per second.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. So then when you move a light ray, when you follow the motion of light hitting a reflective surface, you have something that happens. As we see here, there's a very faint angle of reflection at 45 degrees, so when you shoot that green ray, or it's in green, off of this reflective surface, you see where my arrow is moving. That is also 45 degrees from the normal at the middle. But when you move it through a medium that is no longer of the same density as the first medium that the light was moving in, all of a sudden we see the pathway changing. And in this case, that medium is, they say here, a dense plastic that's transparent. So one could say, well, what's the principle operational in the behavior of light? What causes light to behave and move in the way that it does? One could say, based on just simply looking at the reflection, they could say, well, maybe it's the shortest time. That of all possible pathways, all infinitely imaginable pathways that light could take to go from, let's say, point A, which is here at the light source, to point B over here, it's the quickest pathway. It's the shortest distance. And that might be true for all points of reflection. But then as soon as you observe the path of light when it is being refracted in another medium, it's no longer the quickest distance. Because let's say if you wanted to get from here all the way to over here, you see where my mouse is, that arrow. Well, what's the quickest distance from the green line to where my mouse is currently moving? What do you guys think?
A straight line.
A straight line would be the quickest distance between 2 points, right? But in fact, what we see is that it's not moving in the quickest distance or the shortest distance. It's moving in the quickest time as he discovers it. This is actually a longer distance. And then when it moves out of the plastic medium, it gets back on its original path, which is parallel to the first path. So what he discovered is that it's actually moving in the quickest time. And there's a lot of people who give the example, like in this video, actually, they have the example of a car moving from like, and this is a good example, a car moving in one medium, right? It's moving sort of fast down the road, and then all of a sudden it gets slower when it drives over sand, and then it gets faster again, right? And then same thing here. You could see that the car moving fast on pavement, and then all of a sudden, once it gets into the sand, it changes its trajectory. So the same sort of thing happens between air and water as well, right?
It also slows down, I think, too.
Probably slowing down too, yeah. So that's one paradox that somebody like a Descartes couldn't handle. In Descartes' system, that didn't happen because Descartes was purely moving on the assumption that things always just moved in the shortest time until until he came up with his own discovery that he stole from a fellow named Willebrord Snell. And Descartes stole Snell's discovery and simply took Snell's insight into the quickest time principle, and simply said, no, it's because of the sign index. And he said, just because because light moving from one medium to the other, if you put it like let's say a circle around this, you can get two sine functions that have a relationship. And Descartes said, all you need to do is memorize the index. And that's the reason why it's moving from one medium in another in that different. So can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that was otherwise known as the principle of least time, which one couldn't get at if they were just thinking like a mathematician, like Descartes was. They would have to be thinking at a much higher level to recognize that. And the Cartesians had a big problem with that because they said, oh no, Fermat, that is, you're imposing morality onto the universe, because for light to select the path of quickest time requires judging. It has to be the best of all pathways, the shortest of all pathways. And that quality of imposing a judgment factor onto the universe, which has a moral sort of smell to it, is anthropomorphic. You cannot do that. It's not scientific. And they freaked out. It was a huge battle for like decades and decades. Still is. So that's one thing. And the other reference that LaRouche made earlier was on the question of this, how did he word it? Actually, let's just leave it at that one. That's the quickest time as opposed to shortest distance of light. Yeah, let's leave it at that because we have a lot to go through. And the question, right, of
this,
what's that?
How
Go on.
How is he relating all this to language? Because he speaks of language, like
Yep.
like with poetry. Say, how would you relate all this with poetry?
Language has at its root concepts, and if you have flawed concepts that are in disharmony with the universe, then your language will be contaminated with those flawed concepts. But if you have more healthy concepts, then you might use the same words as somebody who's a liar who doesn't believe in truth, but the meaning of the words and how you are going to use your language will have very different fruit. Same thing for artworks as well.
Think of neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah, which could feasibly be done in a therapeutic, healthy way. But if it's done by a manipulator who believes that human beings are just dogs to be controlled by a zookeeper or something, yeah, that'll result in a very different outcome.
Yeah, think MK Ultra, Operation Mongoose, etc., etc.
Like that, yeah.
Continue, Matt.
Unless anybody has a last question before we move on, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think so. You can go ahead.
Early during the 1948 to 1952 interval, my attack on the fallacy of Wiener's and also John von Neumann's work was enriched by reflection upon my earlier attraction to William Empson's 7 types of ambiguity. See, there's a footnote.
Just a reference to the book.
Okay.
Just, yeah.
From my special standpoint, I saw flaws in some aspects of Empson's work, but that taken into account, it was a very good, mature, and searching piece of scholarly work. I recapitulated what I gleaned from him by working from the standpoint of the notion of cognitive processes, which I had acquired in the course of my adolescent and later pro-Leibniz attack on the absurdities of Kant's critiques. A truthful ambiguity, whether in the description of a rigorously defined experimental subject matter or in the composition of classical poetry, has the characteristic significance of betraying the shadowy, but efficient existence of something which, in reality, exists outside the scope of a statement lacking that ambiguity. The physical principle of ambiguity is beautifully illustrated for study, as I did during 1947, by seeking to identify the physical distinction on principle which sets the greatest classical Greek sculpture from the archaic. I began to equate this already then to the roles of the subjunctive, irony in general, and metaphor in particular in poetry, drama, and classical song settings of poetry. This came to serve as an integral part of my reaction against Wiener's radically reductionist notion of information theory. There is a recognizable element of imbalance in the classical piece. It is not an arbitrary imbalance, but to succeed must be credibly a body caught in mid-motion. The same is the case in Bach's method of well-tempered counterpoint, in which the development of the entire composition expresses a single conception of contrapuntal development in mid-motion. In classical poetry, it is irony, ambiguity, especially through metaphor. All classical ambiguity is truthful, not arbitrarily fanciful. It expresses a true paradox, for which the mind must supply a solution. It is classical art only to the degree that the solution to the paradox is of the quality of a truthful act of cognition. Try an elementary but crucial sort of experiment. Take a mathematical expression from the domain of mathematical physics. Now, think of describing the corresponding physical process of such, which leads from an initial experimental form of ontological paradox through the generation of an hypothetical solution to the experiment which expresses the proof of that hypothesis. Now, express that process as a physical rather than mathematical form in poetry or prose. Best of all, if you have the skill for it, compose a compact classical form of poem which presents each and all phases of that paradox, hypothesis, and proof. Add nothing not relevant to that mission, no symbol-mindedness, please. No frosting on the cake. If you succeed in that mission, focus on the essential cognitive feature of that representation, the paradox, as I have referenced, the relatively simple but richly, devastatingly significant case of Fermat paradoxical juxtaposition of reflection and refraction. The
That is
relative
quite the challenge for poets out there to think how they might go about achieving that objective. It's not something I'm qualified for, but if anybody's listening on YouTube and you have a poetic spark and you want to try your hand at it, please send me an email and send me your poem at info@risingtidefoundation.net. Sorry for a little segue there. You can keep going.
Okay. The relative fault in the mathematical formulation is that when applied according to the obligation of the poet to embed a truthfully stated ambiguity in the composition. It fails to compel the mind to capture the image of the idea in mid-motion, the form in which all true ideas exist. QED is a lie if it is claimed on the basis of what can be demonstrated at the blackboard. For example, the danger to the students and teachers' mind in at the blackboard mathematics, even mathematical physics, is that the victims lose sight of the reality of the matter in their zeal to find a deductive or similar form of literal meaning. An elementary example of this is the attempt to teach at the blackboard Euclidean geometry, in which no physical action is taken into account. Kepler's observation of the equal time, equal areas definition of the planetary orbit and of the harmonic ordering within the array of solar orbits are examples of an ironical evidence of the existence of an underlying physical principle governing the way the geometry of the situation unfolds. The function of the catenary is the relevant model for isochronic action, is among the best pedagogical exercises for showing the relationship between universal principles of geometries, example orbits and cycles, and physical action.
Right. That sort of sets the stage for the second little video that I had put aside. It's related to the first little video that we had seen. But you got to keep in mind, like the reason why, and I know for myself, I don't know if people have a similar experience. The reason why I always did poorly in mathematics was because I feel in hindsight that I was never being given a reason why. Oh, can you guys hear me? Am I breaking up?
Yeah.
Okay. I was never given a reason why anything was true. So I was told to memorize these formulas, and it was irrational. But when you approach it from the way that LaRouche is saying, and I've done this now a little bit, so I've got a certain taste of it, geometrically, as the discovery was made originally, all formulas are made, if they're true, not from math. They're made from people thinking about physical problems in the physical world that have geometric expression. So if you think in those terms, all of a sudden you start seeing the formula as with real knowledge associated with the symbols used. One of the points of the physical reality that creates a paradox is the question, again, that's tied to what's known as the brachistochrone curve. Can you guys see that image of the orange, the brachistochrone? I'm going to play his little video, and here, I'm just going to do a stop share. Your screen share sound. So this is a little 1.5 minute video. It's very short. So the brachistochrone is the curve of fastest descent from point A to B on which a ball moves down from A and reaches B in the shortest time under the influence of gravity. It's based upon the cycloid curve, which is the path traced out by a point on a circle as it rolls along a straight line without slipping, right? So you guys, it's a very special kind of curve. It was first posed by Jean Bernoulli. So we have now three curves or two curves in one straight pathway. One's simply a steep curve that's kind of arbitrary. The other one's specifically a cycloid, and the other one's a straight line. All right, so which one does the ball move down fastest? Now, intuitively, if you were looking at this intuitively, which pathway would you say that the ball would move fastest down?
Probably the straight line.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
middle
Intuitively,
one.
the naive senses would say the straight line because it's the shortest pathway. But in fact, as we see, when we set this experiment up, it's actually the cycloid winning, right? So no matter what you do, the cycloid is always going to be the quickest of all possible curves. Of all infinite possible curves you could select, the cycloid will be always the quickest. Now that says something about the nature of that curve because it's not generated by any geometric way. It's generated by rolling a wheel, a circular wheel, and tracing out the pathway of that circular wheel. So that's not, an arbitrary thing. Oh, can I be heard right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry again for the instability of my connection. And the other short video that's tied to the first one is also a cycloid. Sorry, they make you watch these stupid ads.
Life online these days.
Was that Paul?
I said the videos and the ads. It's the bête noire of life online these days.
Yeah. The other video here on the Totochrone is another paradox, a sort of paradox that arises, where anytime on the cycloid, at any point you release several balls at the same time on the cycloid, it doesn't matter where you release them, they will always end their journey at the exact same time. Right? Some have called this the brachistochrone curve. And the other name for this is the isoparametric theorem, discovered by Leibniz, Bernoulli, and also, I think earlier, Huygens. So, yeah.
Well, I see the importance with these experiments with the optics.
Yeah.
So what is that curve? Is that like part of a real circle, or is it like a parabola?
It's a circle that rolls. So when you I think they did it in the other video, but I don't want to. But it's essentially if you take a circle and you roll it, and you just chart the pathway of one particular moment on the circumference of the circle as a wheel rolling, well, that pathway that moment will trace out will be the cycloid.
So the center of that circle would be far right, upper right on the page, or up on the top someplace on the page.
There it is. You see it? That's the cycloid.
But where the center of that would be off the page, though, right?
It wouldn't have the center the way you conventionally think of it, because it's not closed. It's not like an oval. It's not the same thing. You could do a mirror image of it and make sort of a pseudo oval, but that's not it.
So what am I saying? Is it a true circle?
The thing rolling is a true circle, but the cycloid is not a circle. No.
Or a true segment?
It's not a segment of a circle. No. No, it's a different kind of curve. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a physical curve. So a circle is still a geometric shape, whereas the great discoveries that LaRouche has been emphasizing people need to reevaluate were made by those who were looking at the physical curvatures which the universe shows us, right? Bubbles are not spheres, for example, They're spherical, but they're not perfect spheres.
So they all have
The Earth
like,
is not a sphere. It's a geoid. It bulges towards the equator. The
Yeah,
orbits are not circles. They're elliptical. And even there, they're
oblong
not
or
perfect
whatever.
ellipses. They kind of have little tiny blemishes. Right.
So if I think in the world of circles, to me it's an anomaly.
Exactly. And so the principle of Kepler, one of his laws being that equal areas, by discovering that it isn't circles that shape the pathways of orbits of planets, but rather ellipses, which he rigorously discovered. He was also able to discover that within those systems of ellipses, you have an equal time area function, right? So that is a universal character for all of the motions of planets or even asteroids around the sun on their pathway, is that they sweep out a certain equal area in a certain equal amount of time. And that's something which we find even in other planetary bodies around other stars.
I'm thinking of LaRouche's words on poetry as they may apply to architecture, Matt. When I think of different eras in the primary expressions of architecture taking place in those eras. I mean, late 18th, early 19th century, or up through the middle of the 19th century, the United States featured a lot of neoclassical or Greek revival architecture. I think that was a manifestation of what people were aspiring to. You contrast that with mid 20th century architecture, which, as LaRouche says, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I have a question or a comment, or were you getting ready to respond to Peter?
I was going to say something about the golden section being important in the 19th century architectural schools, and it was extracted in the 1960s completely from all studies of architecture, which was what the Greeks were doing, is they were shaping their structures, their designs around a property of the golden section, which is something unique to the processes of life. And so the fact that that was being revived, like Peter was saying, in the transatlantic and especially in America, was a sign, of a quality of thinking and sensitivity to a relationship between aesthetics, beauty, and truth and functionality, which was consciously attacked by forces that want to keep us divided from these things. So that was what I was just going to point out there. But yeah, Susie, whatever you'd like to say, go for it.
But also divided within ourselves. I'm having a really hard time following most of this because it feels like it's so far above my head. But just this one paragraph that's enlarged. The relative fault in the mathematical formulation is that when applied according to today's generally accepted classroom tradition. Anyway, they fail to engage the imagination, thereby failing to properly engage the mind. Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't engage. It create like the imagination becomes unbounded. You know, when you don't give young people a good reason for why they should learn things or why things are the way they are rather than otherwise, their imaginations become increasingly unbounded by truth. And so, you get a problem where imaginations turn a bit chaotic,
Unanchored, yes.
unanchored, detached from any moral considerations. And so it's not like imagination goes away, but it becomes something that ultimately doesn't serve a useful, it can become destructive, actually. So you want both the reason and the imagination
But when you
to
bring
grow.
the poetry and then what he says about truthfully stated ambiguity, that's like bringing all facets of the mind, the imagination, the soul, whatever. It's bringing all facets of the person together to work on the solution.
Yep, that's the good idea. Yeah, that's the right idea.
We're back to they created systems that are devoid of life. No wonder they don't work.
Don't work the way
Well,
we expect them to.
Yeah. And you know, I bought an issue back of Scientific American back in like over a decade ago, and it was on the orbits of the planets, and I was like, oh, I wonder if they're going to talk about Kepler. And I opened it up, and not only do they not even talk about Kepler, but their conclusion is there is no reason why the orbits of the planets are the way they are rather than some other configuration. It's all, they boil it all down to statistical randomness. And it's like, it just shocked me because that is really, even today, 400 plus years after Kepler made his discovery, by looking at the harmonic musicality, the relationships of the harmonies of the different planets, and proved it. Like, he proved it. It wasn't like a theory that he threw out. He generated his 3 laws because of this. We're still, you know, ignorant to that fact, and instead we're being told, it doesn't really matter the way it is. It could be anyway.
We could put a satellite in space. We can't. We can put it in any orbit we want, can't we?
But we can do that. But who put the planets? I mean, the orbit that it will take, it will fall into certain orbits, but that those orbits are going to be defined by certain physical principles that we didn't create. Those principles were there.
Eventually, that orbit will like degrade, perhaps.
Too soon to say.
Like my satellite.
Too soon to say.
Like if I put a satellite out there, it'll degrade?
I don't know.
Because I did it?
Unless controlled.
I mean, I think philosophically, anything created that has boundary conditions in space and time is not forever. You know, if it has a beginning and an end, and boundaries in space as well, like an outside and an inside, it's safe to say that it might endure longer in a so-called vacuum state, you know, which doesn't have as much chemical or elemental erosion, but it will ultimately not be forever. Whereas the principles are another question, right? Like the actual principles of creation that shape the physical space-time, you know, bubbles pop, as they say, but a sphere is eternal.
Yeah, I was just trying to compare like something that we humans do and something that nature does. I don't know.
No, I mean, think about it. There's a lot of points of it's a valuable exercise to put yourself on.
A waste of time.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Not
at all, because I think that what we read maybe 10 paragraphs before in the text about the Emerson 7 ambiguities, I think it's exactly what you are speaking about, Kelly. I think that you might benefit a lot if you explore more those 7 ambiguities by William Emerson.
7 ambiguities. William
Emerson, E-M-P-S-O-N.
Emerson.
You remember that paragraph maybe half an hour ago?
Yeah.
That Jonathan read. It's about the fact that LaRouche acknowledged that he has been helped by that Emerson, and that Emerson was a literary critic, and he established 7 of ambiguities that would open the mind to more creativity. And precisely number 1 of those 7 ambiguities is metaphor.
Which we talked about. We talked about that a lot last time, didn't we, Kwan?
Exactly, exactly. So, and I just want to finish with that because anyway, I suggest number six is very amusing, okay? Because number six is a statement that doesn't say anything but force reader use his mind, okay? And why I say it's amusing, because that number six, ambiguity by Emerson, well, is embodied perfectly by all Plato's dialogue, okay? Because when Plato is talking about something, he never talks directly about that thing. He will talk about many things, but it forces you to think by yourself.
Yeah, I kind of want to be aware of these ambiguities when I'm thinking.
Oh yeah, I think that you will be amused and uplifted.
Yeah, like kind of identify them as you're like reading something
Yeah.
or
Well,
just thought.
yeah, because this text is about the process of creativity or and cognitive process that precisely make us different. Okay, the anti-anthropic process that we human are the perfect incarnation, if you want. Okay, at least it's our endeavor. Stress our journey. Thing that Emerson Guy Seven Ambiguities is incredible. Incredible. I suggest you to read them.
And yet he wrote a poem and he's still frustrated.
Well, I don't know if he wrote poem because he was a literary critic, but most probably he wrote some poems.
Yeah, I just included the link for people to buy Epson's book in the chat box. They apparently sell pretty cheap for like $4 or $5.
Yeah, I just want to read a small paragraph, okay? Because I think it's a big thing. Is it okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, okay. I think it's at the page. Okay, on my paper, it's page 32. Okay, there is a recognizable element of imbalance in the classical piece. It is not an arbitrary imbalance, but to succeed must be credibly a body caught in mid-motion. The same is the case in Bach's method of when-temporal counterpoint, in which the development of the entire composition expresses a single conception of contrapuntal development in mid-motion. Okay, and the next 6 lines I think are truly, truly interesting. All classical ambiguity is truthful. In classical poetry, it is irony, ambiguity, especially true metaphor. All classical ambiguity is truthful, not arbitrarily fanciful. It expresses a true paradox for which the mind must supply a solution. It is classical art only to the degree paradox is of the quality of a truthful act of cognition. Okay, so that famous act, that famous truthful act of cognition is precisely the opening of the creative space. And what LaRouche himself recognized or acknowledged his debt to that Emerson guy about his 7 ambiguities precisely. More technically speaking, if I may say so.
So in all these ambiguities, that's where you can find truth, or
well, you can find more
by using them.
By using them, exactly. Okay, if you take the metaphor, okay, last time I was speaking of the fact that we are not machine and that we don't generate solution by algorithms. Okay, we generate solution by making rapprochement, what I call the wormholes of the mind. Those ambiguity are precisely expressed technically. The mechanism of language that would open your mind to new possibility.
Like I also think of something like humor.
Oh, absolutely.
Something that's funny. There's like a truth to that.
But of course, irony is a form of humor, for example. And irony is one very strong metaphor.
And humor is when it works, I mean, other than maybe slapstick, but generally speaking, the reason why humor tends to work is because it's taking a naive reading, like a joke tends to sort of set the mind up with a sort of naive reading of reality, and then the punchline turns something inside out. It throws overboard this logical world that you had set up in your mind that was supposed to work a certain way, and all of a sudden the punchline proves that it doesn't, and the mind or the soul can just laugh, you know.
Yeah.
So there's ambiguity built into humor, absolutely.
Yeah.
That eureka moment.
Absolutely. We got the central concept of harmony, transferring the harmony from music to harmony of the movement of the planets. Okay, that would be and from two domains, but with one universal principle linking the two domains: astronomy and music.
And cognizing it
Cognizing
together.
it precisely. Yeah.
And thus we get the phrase, the music of the spheres.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is like when you think of the universe that way, the way Kepler proved it was, you start seeing that it's more of a symphony. It's not a bunch of kinetic reactions of objects with these mysterious forces pushing and pulling, you know, but there's more of a many voices singing together, right? Each planet could be conceived as being a voice within a chorus in order to get one effect, even though each one is doing a different thing.
That's a central idea behind C.S. Lewis's trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Earth, also known as Thulkandra, was the silent planet that the other planets hadn't heard from in a while.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Good point. Yeah, Cynthia was even pointing out to me, she read some of that to me, and C.S. Lewis was intervening on this idea of a cold, emptiness of space when he had his character Ransom look out the window of the spaceship and see this beautiful ocean of substance. And it was just this very, very positive idea of space as being something, I mean, something that is our home, right? We're in we're in space. It's like something we shouldn't think of as being other. And then there's us. It's like it's a false like illusion that was created for us.
I think of those radio photos of the electric universe. You see interactions in between the stars in a whole new way.
Mm-hmm. Let's keep her going.
But what's really gross is the cold emptiness is only in the people that created this system, because they are disconnected from life and truth and beauty. And they're trying to keep everybody else disconnected as well. It's just gross.
It's a good word for it.
Yeah, it's gross, but I guess we have to get over that, eh?
It's good to feel this is something that you should, I think, a healthy repulsion to that is
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Some of what you all are causing to happen in my mind is bringing more hope again, because like I barely even understand the word entropy, but I more or less understand it as, you know, like it's winding down. What is the thing about the engine or whatever that, you know, it's producing less energy, or, you know, it's using less energy. So it's running out of steam. The reality is their reality is entropic, not ours. So theirs is winding down and their system is winding down, but we don't have to wind down with it.
Amen.
Yeah, no, that's very true because the oligarchs ultimately, by their intrinsic structure, are going down the path of destruction. Absolutely.
But this time around, we're going to make sure that they don't hang on to our coattails while we rebuild this thing.
Yeah, but after all, they are humans too. Since we have the pretensions to be more epistemologically developed, we will forgive them, and they can transform themselves into true human beings.
Or at least their grandkids. We'll try to create a situation, hopefully, where their grandkids have a chance at it.
Huh? What did you say, Matt?
Oh, I said at the very least, we could create a situation where their grandkids would have a shot at accessing their humanity. It might be too late for all the living oligarchs currently kicking around.
Well, it's the thing I was talking about the true aristocratic man. So we're going to make sure that the only leaders we allow have truly merited that position.
That's yeah. At that point, we're going to be in a much better. Yeah, well, I think that'll be humanity achieving its mature state of development at that when we start doing things like that. Yeah.
Oh, please, Lord, let it be time. Let it be time.
For me, a lot of my favorite stories were Andersen's fairy tales, where like this guy Andersen, he really knew how to relate with children and to give something really moral in his story, and sometimes only kids would understand, not even adults.
Oh, yeah. Andersen had a huge power. I mean, everyone should definitely have their kids experience as much of his works as possible. That would definitely spark a moral fire in any kid. Yeah, absolutely.
Some of these are timeless.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, let's try to get through this section here. We're almost done this section, and we'll just end at the free trade as colonialism, and maybe just have a little bit of discussion at the end of that. So let's try and make it through this in the next 20 or so minutes. You want to read, John?
Yeah, at the correct spot, Matt?
Yeah.
Ideas are communicated only at what is not said. They are imparted, as Plato's Socratic dialogues do, as the stimulation of creative, cognitive powers of the mind by posing an ambiguity which impels the mind to generate the idea which replaces the ambiguity as such. Verifiable hypotheses which are generated as solutions for experimentally defined ontological paradoxes. This is the characteristic of an original discovery. It is also the characteristic of the individual's reenactment of a valid discovery of a universal physical principle. When we describe this characteristic feature of scientific activity to a classical poet, such as Shakespeare, Shelley, Keats, Goethe, Schiller, or Heine, his comment would be, aha, we classical poets call that the principle governing irony and metaphor. Think of how much effort was expended from Fermat through Huygens, Leibniz, Bernoulli, Fresnel, Ampere, et al. In search for a clearer and deeper understanding of the ironical distinction between simple reflection and refraction. From Kepler through Gauss and Riemann, the essence of successive steps of fundamental scientific progress is the ontological paradoxes inherent in the mathematical notions of number and of geometry, which alarm the mathematician into recognizing that physics is not a product of the application of mathematics, but rather that good mathematics lies essentially in the paradoxes which overturn previously accepted teachings of that subject. Paradoxes of such types as isochronism, least action, and so on, which ultimately reveal themselves to be expressions of something superior to mere mathematics, physics. The physical world's existence does not lie within the domain of sense certainty as such. It exists as the reality which prompts those shadows we know as perceptions. The prompting of a sense of reality occurs by forcing certainty to reveal the fact that objects are merely shadows. We must prove the existence of that which causes the shadows by demonstrating the efficiency of a conception through which we, physically, can control the behavior of the ambiguosity arising in the domain of shadows. That is the very essence of scientific method. It is also the essence of successful modes and forms of classical artistic composition. The power of classical poetry and of the development of language under the burden of being a medium of classical poetry points our attention to the origin of those qualities of such a literate form of language, which make it implicitly superior to mathematics in communicating ideas about the physical universe. Language was developed as a tool of characteristic human behavior. This is more readily seen from the standpoint of Leonardo da Vinci's attention to the tuning of voices according to Florentine bel canto voice training. The argument is much clearer when we examine the significance of bel canto voice training as the basis for the development of well-tempered polyphony by Bach. The very qualities of classical poetry and classical well-tempered polyphony which offend the mathematics students' blind zeal for strictly literal meanings does not make the student a better mathematician, only a relatively sterile personality and an awfully bad artist. Take a lesson from a scientist who was a leader in classical art and also in mathematics, our friend and Benjamin Franklin's Kastner. Kastner was apparently the first to insist explicitly that we must orient future mathematics to the goal of developing an anti-Euclidean geometry rather than a non-Euclidean one. Great progress toward this goal was made by his student Gauss on the subject of curvature. The objective was reached by Gauss's student Riemann as announced in the latter's habilitation dissertation. Kastner told his collaborators and followers, we must not attempt to improve upon Euclid, we must challenge the fallacy-ridden a prioristic assumptions which underlie Euclid's principles, thus introducing an anti-Euclidean geometry. Take the case of Kastner's most famous student, Carl Gauss. What poetry there is in Gauss's mathematics, or the discoveries of Gauss' most celebrated student, Bernhard Riemann. That said, on background, apply the same principle of ambiguity to a crucial problem in economics. I refer to
Okay. That was a lot to take in and let stew. I think my can I be heard right now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, there was a lot of material to take in. But the interesting thing when one looks at somebody like, as he points out, Kestner, and he made this real big emphasis on this question of anti-Euclidean geometry. And I know that a lot of people who are into this sort of thing are aware that there were non-Euclidean geometries created around that time of the 19th century. But they don't think of it, they don't realize that a non-Euclidean geometry is not necessarily getting out of the cage of Euclid. Because what makes Euclid, what makes him a problem isn't, hold on, someone's trying to get into the thing. I think Hassan just lost his thing. The problem with Euclid, and Euclid is something you could use like a tool, but if you let your mind follow the Euclidean rules of reasoning, you have to assume that there are these limited blind assumptions about the linearity of space, about the wholes being some of their parts, which are just embedded in the Euclidean axioms upon which the entire language is built. And the people like Bolyai, Lobachevsky, were figures who are like contemporary with Gauss, who are coming up with their own non-Euclidean geometries, basically recognizing that, no, space doesn't have to be straight or flat. It could be curved, right? The parallel postulate doesn't have to be presumed to be an absolute truth, that two lines will always go parallel, move parallel as they extend into infinity. That doesn't have to be true. And they created a system which was in better approximation of reality as we discover it, but they still use the Euclidean method of basing their entire system on axioms and postulates. Whereas Kestner and his student Gauss and Gauss's student Riemann developed a different non-Euclidean geometry, which was don't have any assumptions that are blind. Prove everything with your mind and build on what you discover. Don't benchmark, right? And then from there, every brick you're putting into your building is a brick built on wisdom, on real knowledge. And so the building is going to have stability and it'll be open to being made better because you can always, you know how the minds moved of those who created the bricks that you're working with. And that's very different. And they're just saying, look at the physical curvatures of reality. Don't assume in any abstract geometry as having precedent over those physically discoverable curvatures, which might look a little bit like a hanging chain or a hanging bridge might look like a parabola, but it's not a parabola. And if you try to pretend it's a parabola, you will not make a discovery. Or the catenary might, or the cycloid might look like a partial circle, but it's not. And if we treat it like it is, we won't discover the pathway of, or the, we call it the isoparametric principle. To do that require, it helps to have a poetic, some saturation in poetry and art and music. These things really help the mind move laterally and just move in ambiguity, which is all we're doing, right? When we're moving into the unknown from the known. The unknown is all ambiguity. We can't expect to have crystal answers when we're going into the unknown. Anybody else have?
I'm thinking of light and darkness, like the known and the unknown, or light and darkness, or light and shadows. And then there's the area between them, the fringe area, which is maybe where where he can find those answers between of light and darkness and in that little tiny fringe area. I don't know.
Matt, I'd like to drop a footnote to Kelly's observation. Almost all of us here may be familiar with the television show The Twilight Zone. And what Kelly talked about made me think of The Twilight Zone. And what was The Twilight Zone in Rod Serling's experience? It was the space of time and also the space of observation when the be undetectable to a paratrooper. Rod Serling was a paratrooper during World War II, and that time is the critical space and time between immediately before hitting terra firma again.
Like
a time of great uncertainty.
The moment the sun just goes down at the horizon, at that moment, there's like these things happen, right?
Right. And that's how he
and that's the twilight
described at the beginning of every show.
Well, there's definitely, I mean, I think this mixed, like what Hassan was saying in our original conversation around the unexpressed poem, that we see a mixed emotion of pain and also a yearning to become. And so there's this light and darkness clash, creating a tension. There's obviously tension, but it's like, how do you think about that tension? And poets are always like exploring different ways of, like, melancholy, right? Melancholy is an emotion, is a mixed emotion that's tied to sadness and beauty. It's beautiful and joyous, but it's also sad and dark a little bit. It's a bit of both. Which you'd think, well, these are opposing things. An Aristotelian or somebody just using pure logic would say, no, something is A or not A. Something can never, a rule of reasoning is something could never be both A and not A. All logicians know that, but all of a sudden here, when we're thinking in a poetic way, we're like, no, actually everything is in some ways reasonably both A and not A. It's both, finite and infinite. We're infinitely divisible, as is everything, but it's also, we're one. You're one Peter, one John, one Quan. We're one. So you're both one and many and infinite.
Yeah.
So a logician would at this point break down and spontaneously combust.
It's just your position where you're observing that one in the many.
Yeah. That's a factor that makes things different.
I once shared with somebody who was a movie fan like me that, in my opinion, black and white films expressed truth and beauty more effectively than color films.
Because of how they played with shadow and framing of the.
Yes, exactly. And a masterful director can lift that art form really, really well. I'm thinking of Michael Curtiz, who did Robin Hood and most famously did Casablanca.
Love that film. I agree with you there, Peter, in a lot of ways, and particularly because black and white movies, as you say, unlike color movies, to make them meaningful to you, you have to use your own imagination to fill in detail.
I think they also. Sorry, go ahead.
Your response to black and white is exactly that. It's black and white. There is no color. And your appreciation of it will be, to a certain degree, at least in my thinking, your ability to glean meaning from certain scenes. Even though they're black and white, you're the one that's expected to put the color into
There
them.
you go.
In your mind.
That's exactly what I was thinking. You have to put the color in it, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah. I've put a little thing in the chat box too, that anybody who's interested in classical music, one of the foundations for Bach and for many of the composers that we can ascribe the creation of the great classical tradition to, is something called Effektenlehre. And what it is a belief in the universal human emotional response to certain musical ideas. I mean, if we think of something, Effektenlehre, it's written in the chat, spelled there in the bottom. Okay. I mean, the simplest way of approaching this is, if you have any knowledge of music, the difference between a major key and a minor key. One is happy, one is sad. So any piece of music written in a minor key, is likely to bring about a different emotional response to the same piece of music written in a major key. And that, to some degree, Effektenlehre suggests that these principles, human principles, response principles, are universal. All people will respond to this music a certain way. Now, I'm not arguing that it's necessarily true or holds true, but the example that I've given there is the use of film music. Go and watch, a film and listen to the soundtrack, and you will notice that at certain points in the movie, there will be specific musical ideas that you can identify as bringing forth a response. One of the easiest ones in the example I give there is a car chase. If you're watching a car chase in a movie, then all of a sudden the tempo of the music is likely to be faster, to imply faster motion. And your response, watching the scene, listening to the music, is to draw you into the motion of the car chase, if you like. The music serves that purpose. Now, film composers use this all the time, but the idea of Effektenlehre is much, much, much more subtle than that in terms of in the hands of a Bach and many of the composers around his time and that he influenced, etc., etc., etc. Remembering that I'm talking about instrumental music, it's relatively easy for somebody who deals with lyrics, for example, to write something that will induce an emotional response. That I'm not trying to make that sound simplistic. I'm simply saying that what I'm referring to is instrumental music, not music with words that sort of lead you in a direction to meaning. It's the music itself that brings forth a specific and a designed human emotional response. The musical ideas that do that. And the major minor thing is the simplest example I can give, and it's readily identifiable, as I say, to anybody that has an even basic understanding of music.
Yeah, it's interesting that even Aristotle had talked about the different modes and their usefulness for political effects. In the sense, you could use the Phrygian, the Dorian mode in order to get certain emotions out of the masses that you want to influence. If you're going to war, you won't use, you'll use a certain type of tempo, a certain type of mode, versus if you want people to be more docile. So there was already like a sense of the relationship between certain patterns of musical melody and frequencies and their effects on the soul of the people. Whereas Aristotle was like, in many ways, writing this as a guide for those who wish to influence the masses, without it necessarily being. But is the influence happening for a moral reason, or is it being done to keep them more in the cave, believing in the shadows? And so, like art techniques, like rhetoric, other things, the modulation of the voice according to certain scientific tones and principles that will get and induce an effect in your audience, can be used by an Obama to get a certain state of people who are influenced, or by Martin Luther King, who will also use rhetoric and tonality and will, but it will be done with a very different intention and outcome because of that intention, which is tied to a moral principle. But yeah, the question is like how to use these musical principles in a way which liberates people or makes them or matures them, versus keeping them infantile.
Hey, Paul, you said you put that in the chat. Did you forget to hit enter?
Yeah, I don't think you might have just sent it to an individual by accident, not to the whole group.
No, it's there. I'm seeing it.
I'm not seeing it either.
Well, just a minute.
Sorry to interrupt whoever was getting ready to speak.
How can I get rid of just a minute? Just a minute. Okay. To everyone. Boom, boom, boom. There you go. Hopefully you're seeing it now.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. And Kwan, this one's for you. Kwan still with us?
Yeah, I'm still there.
Okay, I referenced the word paranasomia earlier in our chat today.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, my spelling sucks big time. And it would simply take me way too long right now to try and find, the reference where I know I could find it. I would actually have to go back and watch several chats, if you like, to find the actual spelling. What I've done, though, is I've put a post up on the site, Dr. Farrell's site, and I've asked for some help. Can somebody please give me the correct spelling of it? I mean, the spelling I gave you, if you Google that, you're going to get something to do with a sleep disorder.
Okay.
But I think the idea of paranasomia, if I can give you the correct spelling, and if you want to look into it a bit, I think you'll find it interesting. The same thing, Matthew,
Okay.
your reference there to, Plato and the ancients, for example, talking about musical modes and how they can be used. The idea of Effektenlehre, Bach, classical music, comes at the tail end of the Renaissance, when all of that knowledge once again appears in a Western framework. So it's no wonder that Bach and composers like him get their ideas, I would suggest, from such references. Suddenly, that knowledge is out there in the the medium for anybody that's interested in it. And when I say that knowledge, I'm talking about Hermetic knowledge, ancient knowledge, Greek philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, you name it, in a way that it wasn't before. And Bach, in particular, is somebody who wrote with the idea of Effektenlehre at the back of his mind as a foundation to pretty much everything that he wrote.
That's a powerful idea and a great word. I hadn't heard about it until you just brought it up. Mm-hmm. It's very good.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as I said, it is a process, if you like, that is, Susan, you'll appreciate this, that there seems to have been sideline of, post the music of Bach. I'm not trying to condemn all classical music, but there's an awful lot of it that's out there at the moment that does not express ideas like that. I mean, when classical music went through its abstract periods, the atonal phase, Schoenberg, Eldenberg, all of those guys, etc. I mean, and lots of others too. There was this total breakdown in tonal harmony. And I would be bold to suggest that tonal harmony and melody and all of those things is far, far, far more appealing to human beings. It just feels better. Physically, emotionally, but physically especially, it resonates with us as human beings. Whereas a lot of atonal music to me just sounds like noise.
I think there's also something there reflecting back to the comments on black and white films. The power of resonating with people, I think, is strongly connected to those filmmakers were very much influenced by the stage and theater, which again is an art form that is much more human with a physical connection to the audience. And it changes how you create the medium and sort of show the story.
Yep.
Yeah. But once again, it's like ancient Greek plays. You have to for the Greek playwrights in ancient times, you have to provoke a catharsis, meaning an uplifting. Well, catharsis first being the diarrhea.
Cleansing.
So you have first to get catharsis.
It's cleansing.
So you have to remove, cleansing, exactly. You have to remove the lower emotions first. And once the lower emotions are put in parenthesis or cleans away, you get access to the higher emotions precisely, or what you mentioned as the affect and lere, because affect is a word that is used in English and in French too, okay, meaning the emotion of the moment.
So are you talking like transforming from one frequency to another?
Yes, yes, if you want, because that's true that when you clear, because what we forgot often is that, well, speaking of the shift in modern time, okay, when we speak of emotions, there is a false dichotomy or false opposition, which is precisely a very deep paradox, precisely between emotions and reason, according to the limited understanding of modern time. Okay, the ancient, they don't oppose reason and emotions. Okay, they would distinguish between lower emotions like jealousy, envy, or anger, versus higher emotions, superior emotions. Okay, and let's not forget that the aristocratic man is characterized by agape, okay, which is an emotion, and the emotion of deep joy that would make you excited, but excited not in the sense of excitation, but ordinary excitation, but rather enthusiasm. Okay, the English word that is closest to agape, enthusiasm, antheos, God within. So when you have, yeah, exact, descend, God within, God descended, exactly. And when you have the cleansing of removing the lower emotions, you reach to that enthusiasm, which is the basic emotions of the aristocratic man, giving him the power, the mental power, and the energy to go into that epistemological journey precisely. Okay, so the beginning is not a dry reason. The beginning is an emotional uplifting to enthusiasm, and it's here that poetry, classical music, beautiful architecture can play an immense role, by because if you're in a beautiful classical environment, there are more chances that you would be uplifted to enthusiasm rather than in a lower architecture. For example, if you listen to classical music, the chances are higher that you would be uplifted to enthusiasm rather than to listen to a low quality music. And etc. for all the art.
Was the I was looking for a video by a pianist named Jérôme Duclos, who had done this wonderful. He was a professional pianist, and I can't find it. It seems like it's been scrubbed from the internet. He did a lecture with a live piano, basically saying atonalism and after was the translation, and we had posted it on the Rising Tide site. It was taken down, and I couldn't find it anywhere when I searched. But essentially, this guy was able to not only perform these different atonal pieces of music by, different atonalists of the 20th century. Atonalism just means an abandonment of any tones, of any melody that's intelligible, in order to have something more pure and thus uncontaminated by the pollution of reason, which is like a tyrant to the artistic emotions that should be free. So that's the philosophy of atonalism, just like it's the philosophy of abstract art too, painting. You have to liberate the artist from the tyranny of thought, of intelligibility and reason. So what he did is he took a very famous piece in front of a musically proficient audience, and he performed it and made something like 80 mistakes consciously. And not a single person in the audience was able to point out a single mistake. But then he performed something very simple by Mozart and made like 3 little errors, and everybody could pick out exactly where those errors were. But yet, so it just demonstrated that there's a lot of fakery that this atonalism is built on. You know, you're basically putting your arm, just laying it down on the piano keyboard, just making sounds come out. And there's nothing whatsoever that anybody can recognize or even hum to themselves afterwards, right? There's no intelligible memory that you could have of a melody that you could hum. So it's in defiance of the human spirit. Like, it doesn't, as much as people are told they're supposed to respect this, it's so unnatural. It doesn't take. It works for a while, but ultimately it's never going to be something that people can bring themselves to enjoy unless they're being intimidated or bribed.
I have a good friend here who's just back from a tour of Mexico, and a sax player, American guy, who specializes in free jazz. Totally random, totally made up on the spot. You know, the aim is to produce something that is totally individual in a performance and will never be repeated. Now, he's a friend, good friend. I support him and everything like that. I'll even go and listen to the concerts that he gives here. But I have to say that it is the ugliest noise, and it is really hard for me to sit there. It makes me feel physically ill.
Yeah.
But it has a very, very minor following, you know, based on the idea of individualism. I reject that one totally, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I don't tell him this. I don't say it to his face, but no, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, but I think, Paul, I think that you just gave a very good criterion. If it makes you sick physically,
yeah,
not,
it doesn't resonate. I mean, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but you know, I mean, music is about sound, and sound is about frequencies and resonance and everything like that. And the entirety of your human body is built on frequency and resonance at every level. I mean, it's the way
Absolutely.
cells communicate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you go and listen to a really, really good Bach organ chorale in a church with a full church organ. If you're not moved by that, if you don't feel the sound, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, the cows are well known to love very much Bach and Mozart, so I would trust the judgment of the cows.
An interesting phenomena
cows.
happening in the world at the moment that I'm seeing lots of reports of is groups of animals now walking in circles.
Yeah.
I don't know whether anybody else has seen that.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to follow that one. What do they know that we don't know?
Yeah.
What are they anticipating? What are they trying to tell us?
Well, you know, they cannot be intimidated by the new critics who would write very long thesis to defend the new music, for example. So they are more we can trust the cows because they are not intimidated by musical critics.
Speaking of that new music, the rise of atonal music in particular was driven very, very much by the CIA and MK Ultra.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Schoenberg.
I mean, part of their public rationale for that was, we want to prove that Western civilization gives artists more freedom of expression than Soviet artists. That was, the public face of it. But there's more going on there.
No, it's much more than that.
Taking away or limiting, if you like, people's ability to experience the emotional catharsis of really, really good classical music. And I don't want to limit it to just classical music. You can get this with blues, with pop, with all sorts of musical, right? I mean, if it's based around a tonal harmony particularly, it has the potential to resonate within the human body. Yeah. There are plenty of, great people out there in jazz and in various other styles of music doing wonderful things along those lines. But there was a deliberate attempt by the CIA to promote atonal music and abstract painting, the messiness of, what's his name, Jackson Pollock.
Yeah.
Any monkey could reproduce what he does.
Paul, don't offend the monkeys, please.
No, yeah, okay, sorry. But you know what I mean. There was a deliberate attempt to drive people's appreciation of art away from certain human responses, and I would use the word transcendent responses. I don't particularly want to go, God influenced responses or whatever. But if you happen to have a particularly religious bent and want to go down that road, then yeah, transcendent, higher.
Yeah. Well, I think what Quan was saying was solid. Yeah, that was sort of touching on that idea that like the higher emotions are something which is accessing them and finding greater joy in the more noble emotions, which are tied to also reasonable thought as well. It's not just emotions versus thought, is part of the maturation of a healthy, well-rounded human soul that goes from, being a baby to being an adult and going through the cycles of life. And unfortunately, when that happens, we tend to recognize lies, which are, you'd say, between truth and lies, especially lies done for really bad intentions that they're hiding, are ugly. And so ugliness is a function of an aesthetic judgment. So when we have a well organized, developed aesthetic sensibility that we've worked on because we've eaten good soul food, like just like our bodies get better or worse when we eat bad food or good food, our souls get better or worse when we eat bad or good soul food. And so that takes a little bit of time, obviously eating super sweet, salty things that are like full of trans fats taste good and they're kind of addictive. And it's like not as enjoyable to eat a salad, but ultimately, when you realize how much better you feel when you have like a good quality salad, you increasingly find more pleasure, even though it's more subtle. And the same thing for classical paintings, artworks, things of that sort. It awakens more subtle but more matured emotions. And the oligarchy has been working very hard over thousands of years to try to obscure or keep us underdeveloped. And artworks that do that are the best. Atonalism, contemporary art, other things like that, horror movies. A lot of the stuff we take for granted in our society did not occur organically in the culture because people just wanted, more nihilistic films stories turned into films.
Yeah.
It's not like there was ever a desire for that. And thus the market, the demand created a supply. The way we've been told, there has been artificial, like you've said, Paul, CIA, MI6, Tavistokian social engineers consciously putting artificially massive amounts of money and energy into destructive forms of artworks.
Yeah, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For years and years.
Look, I would mention one thing here too. It's not that atonal music per se is necessarily ugly and evil under all circumstances. One of the pieces that I had to study when I was doing my music degree was a piece by Arnold Schoenberg, a noted atonal composer. It's called Survivors from Warsaw. And when you know what the content is, in other words, what he's writing the piece of music about, a very, very ugly scene in Warsaw, the ghettos, etc., the use of atonal music as a background, ugly as it is in terms of, a comparison between that and tonal music, it is almost perfect as a setting for what he's trying to get across emotionally. So it's not that atonal music per se has no, it's like saying all abstract art is meaningless. Well, it's not, some of it's pure crap, but some of it's worth looking at too. It sort of, it touches the mind in different ways. And for me, at least, the ability to discern, it's an expression of where you are as a person. Not everybody who listens to Survivor from Warsaw, for example, would have the same emotional response that I might have. It is hard to listen to if you're not, experienced with atonal music and what it purports to be. It's the only piece that I would ever reference. I haven't spent a lot of time in my life revisiting atonal music, and I don't intend to either. But it does say that sometimes some of these things which might be used very, very negatively and have been used very negatively, as Matthew is saying and writing in the chat, it's, throwing out baby with bathwater and everything like that. Sometimes something atonal can actually be used to say something profound and worth listening to.
I'm going to show you my favorite piece of abstract art, okay? I'm going to do a screen share. This is my favorite piece of abstract art I've ever seen. It's a Norman Rockwell. Somebody had challenged Norman Rockwell, who didn't respect Jackson Pollock's paintings that were becoming a big thing. And they said, you're just saying that because you're jealous because you can't paint anything as good as Jackson Pollock because you're so constrained by your belief in realism. And this is a massive painting, by the way. It's like the size of a wall. It's like that's the size of a real guy. And he's like, well, let's just see. And he just essentially did a Jackson Pollock, which was indistinguishable from anything else that Jackson Pollock had done that sells for like $400 million.
Yeah.
It's called
I
The
wonder what
Connoisseur.
Rockwell got for it.
What is that? The one on the right there?
Yeah.
That one here. Yeah, the Connoisseur is the name of it. Who's just admiring.
I don't know.
Matthew,
Yeah.
Matthew, this is what I mean in my reference to Schoenberg, for example. The picture that you're looking at there, again, lots of people would walk up that painting who have, again, not much of an appreciation or like for abstract art, take a look at it and go, oh, somebody's just splattered paint on a canvas. But if you know why Rockwell painted that, if you have some understanding of, the foundation to the piece of art, that gives you a way of looking at the painting that is quite different to just coming across it, walking around a museum.
Of course, yeah. Well, it's a joke. It's a visual joke.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's got a visual punchline.
Yeah, and knowing that gives you a whole different insight when you're standing in front of the painting. It's exactly what I mean by Survivor from Warsaw, Schoenberg's piece. Knowing what he's writing about, having some understanding of the history of the Warsaw Ghetto, can give you a bit of an insight into why the music itself is, as ugly as it might appear to be. I mean, he's writing a piece of music about a very ugly incident.
Have you ever heard the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising by Paul Robeson?
I might have many, many years ago. I certainly do like Paul Robeson.
I just shared it. But I mean, there's a lot of ways to treat ugliness. I mean, I guess, it's a big philosophical discussion, but the world has a lot of ugliness. And the question is always like, when as an artist you treat the ugliness, are you doing it in a way which is designed to empower or make people, what is the effect on the souls of the audience that are going to watch or listen to your productions when you're thinking of something that ugly that had happened? And do you want to make people more disempowered or more angry or awaken to lower emotions of rage or hate or fear? Or do you want to awaken the higher emotions that are more noble out of the effect of having experienced your artwork? Because I would say I've heard Schoenberg's piece that you're referencing. I don't see any edific like nothing that I see or heard in that. Could I understand that? I don't think it would improve the people at all or make them better or more capable of,
I'm not suggesting that for a moment. I'm simply saying that your appreciation of the piece is elevated somewhat when you know what he's writing about and why he chooses that particular musical technique as the background to the lyric that's being spoken.
I guess it would be if he could do anything other than that, or if he wanted to do anything other than that, I would respect him more. But because he doesn't seem to ever want to do anything but that, I don't find any respect or modulation.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not promoting Arnold Schoenberg's music, along with most of the atonal composers.
Yeah, but I see a practical use of that kind of things. Okay, for someone having developed a stable soul inside, it would be a test if you can maintain an inner cosmos when you are exposed to those monstrous things.
A lot of it depends on the perspective that you bring. And that's a reflection of your own inner development, which is what Susan keeps referencing. And I agree with you wholeheartedly, Susan. And don't think for a minute that I understand every aspect of this conversation. I don't. That's why I'm here.
But it sounded like what you were saying about that piece of music was just knowing his intent helped that to be more cathartic for you.
I mean, in amongst all of the shit that I had to listen to, from a study point of view and analyze, etc., etc. That was one piece that I thought, well, okay, yeah, I'll let that one pass because of the intent. Because it, to me, it was an example of how you can think of it as film music. If that music was used as the background to a movie of the Warsaw Ghetto, for example, it would probably, because you've got images to go with it then, it would probably come across more meaningfully than just listening to it as a, recording, or I wouldn't pay money to go and see a performance of it.
Yeah, but I would say that maybe there's a shift in the mentality after the Romantics or from the Romantics, okay? Because in the past with the classical mentality, you're supposed to expose only your noble emotions and not your lower emotions. And the mentality shift from the Romantics is that you are allowed to expose in public your lower emotions. And there's a paradox here, okay? Because in the past, of course, people had lower emotions, but they were aware of it, but they didn't see it as something to be exposed in public. And here we have the educational standpoint, okay? If you're dealing with grown-up persons who can digest that kind of thing, is not a problem. But what to do with the children or young people exposed to those things?
Right.
I didn't follow everything that you said, but I very much like the idea that lower emotions should not necessarily be exposed in public.
Definitely agree.
We ought to get some of that back.
Yeah, we sure
please.
should, because at the moment we're being saturated with it.
No, yes. Well, that's a civilizational shift.
Yeah.
And
there's a control element in there that I'm reflecting in my comment.
yeah, sure. Well, you remember the movie about Mozart, Amadeus?
Yeah.
He was speaking with the Emperor Leopold I, and he was trying to convince the emperor about Le Nozze di Figaro, and the courtiers were not too enthusiastic because it was not a noble subject precisely, and the line is famous. Okay, so I probably the historical Mozart did not say it, but the line is famous from the movie. So the actor answered to the emperor, "But Your Majesty, those people shit in marble."
Good to marvel.
Yeah. And I would say that civilizational shift started during that so-called Enlightenment, okay, from 1750 to now, if you want.
Yeah, the materialist uprising.
Yeah. And it's debatable, okay, because once again, if it's for grown-up people, no problem. It can be dealt with as a kind of play of game. But when it's pervasive in all the society, the problem of a good education and of bad influence on young people can be discussed seriously.
Yeah. Right.
Most
Well, it's like that
definitely.
for a lot of things. Like, yeah, it's how to be authentic and showcase your honest emotional state, and honest, because that's, you don't want to just be all cloistered where everyone's just withholding what they actually feel and just trying to act like they have the right behavior, which is somehow mature behavior, but not feel anything inside. That just creates a schizophrenia in society. Like, you don't want, people walking around just ashamed to talk about sex or something like that. But there's like a question of, are you going to encourage 5-6-year-olds to, talk and learn about sex, or are they going to be like, should they not try to learn more the things that are appropriate to them at that stage of development, and then wait a little bit before these discussions happen?
No,
you have them sitting on a lap
Matthew.
of a drag queen or something, being read story time.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly. Yeah, you've got to encourage 5-year-olds to run around talking about their multi-gender.
yeah, like kind of skipping steps there, right?
Put it mildly.
Oh yeah. that's a whole other topic.
Yeah, but when it's done on purpose, it's obvious that it's done to bring down people. It's obvious. I mean, when it's addressed to 5-year-old people, come on.
Yeah, the whole aim of the transhumanist movement.
Yeah.
A return to an ancient androgyny.
Yeah, it's the old formula. That's really what it is. It's just they're using the exact same.
I would argue exactly that. The transhumanism is nothing more than a return to an ancient alchemical desire for a return to androgyny.
No, I think you're onto something.
Yeah, but the return to androgyny, it depends what you mean by that, okay? Because in many authentic spiritual tradition, androgyny is a symbol for the enlightened man, okay? Meaning that he make a synthesis of his inner masculine and inner feminine, but that androgyny has been used a lot as a psychobabble too for psyops, okay? That's the problem.
Sure. Yeah.
That's the problem, because many things, you were speaking of the Hermetic tradition, for example. If you read the fantasies from the psyops since the last century, a lot of their lexicon is from the Hermetic tradition, among other things, okay?
I'm thinking more in terms of the cosmological question. If you look at almost all of ancient cosmologies from cultures all around the world, okay, the original God, if you want to call it that, is an androgynous figure who splits. I mean, think of the Hindu tradition, and I forget that they get this in order, but, you know, Vishnu creates Krishna and Brahman, you know, by pulling from his left side and his right side, etc. God creates, you know, Jesus and the Holy Spirit, you know, by splitting, if you like. It's nearly always associated with a triadic approach too, by the way. That's another interesting corollary there. But you begin, whether it's the Mayans, whether it's the Vedic traditions, whether it's Christian traditions, you name it, go back. It begins with the idea of an androgynous creature that then splits itself to create you know, humankind, if you like. I mean, if you look at some of the Western traditions, you know, some of these are, you know, Sumerian traditions, for example, that talk about the Anunnaki and the gods, etc., etc. Humankind repopulated became such a difficult proposition. We're going to confuse their language and we're going to split them in two.
Yeah.
These are ancient traditions that to me, and it's not my original idea, this is, you know, things that I've learned, people that I've read who talk about this, who express transhumanism in those terms. It's a desire to return to the alchemical tradition of the philosopher's stone, and the aim of alchemy was the creation of the higher man, which is androgynous.
Well,
which is androgynous.
Yes, but that is very interesting, because the androgynous fundamentally is the multipotential entity, okay?
Yeah.
And that is, how can I say it? Presented in the psyops stuff, it's rather a fantasy for regression. It's not something uplifting.
Yeah. Certainly.
Correct.
Certainly. Yeah.
Because the goal of it today is confusion and debasement.
Exactly.
And to carry us further and further from our actual identity.
Yes, Suzanne. Confusion and debasement. And there's a word for that. Orwellian speech.
Yeah.
Double speak.
Yeah, double speak. Exactly. Confusion and debasement. Because, don't worry, I'm not going to bother you with a speech on alchemy or Hermetic doctrine. At the beginning, those things are the high tradition of spirituality of the Mediterranean basin, okay, Egypt, southern Greece, and so on. But once again, in the context of modern psyops, that lexicon has been used to create an Orwellian psychobabble.
But I mean, this thing has just been so absolutely painful this last couple of years. Because
it's going to continue that way too, I'm afraid.
There was such a war against women and the role that a woman traditionally had. And then we began to see this war on men. And I just absolutely want to puke when I hear someone say that thing about toxic masculinity.
Yeah, definitely.
But now we have an absolute war against our children. It's
gender.
Got to stop.
Yeah. Once again, it has to be read within the context of PsyOps with specific goals.
But also social media has had a great effect on, it really multiplied this insanity. TikTok in particular. TikTok is like this horrible place. Absolutely horrible, where, the trends from there, it's just scary stuff.
Yeah, but TikTok or other social media platforms, they're only the technical amplificators of that tendency, having started a century ago. Okay, now they have more technical tools to propagate their psyops.
But even in 2010, this wasn't normal. Like 12 years ago.
Well, there is an utter acceleration of history in both sense, okay, in the debasement and in the uplifting. So the question is, will the debasement win or the uplifting win? Because once again, the acceleration is on both sides.
Love wins.
Yeah?
Love wins.
Yeah, it can be stated like that.
Well, it's interesting that in China, you have like a real Confucian classical renaissance happening right now in many ways. There's obviously problems culturally, just like there are in all parts of the world. You got debauched, degenerate stuff there too, but you actually have something which is becoming like popular as far as a classical, deeper appreciation for the ancient traditions and ideas and artistic movements. And I get that just by watching even like Chinese shows on YouTube or Netflix. And you're like, wow, the quality of idea content and complexity and sophistication of the stories and characters is unlike anything I can find in Western shows of like that tackle very similar topics. Oftentimes, even like office drama has like layers of Lao Tzu and like deeper subtleties that I don't get that at all when I watch like Western, media. So there's, but that's on a low level. On a deeper level, there is a Confucian Buddhist Renaissance that doesn't want to sacrifice and is fighting to defend these cultural identities in opposition to the transhumanist post-truth dynamic that's pressing on the world right now. So I think that there's a hunger for it. The more people are exposed to this ugliness and the absurdity, I think that it also creates a backlash because many people then see, well, actually, I'd rather something more natural. So you have, I think a lot more openness to tackling big ideas of truth and conspiracy and things like that now than I've ever seen before in my lifetime, at least. There's a big hunger.
That's true.
Yeah.
You need to post some examples for us to watch. Send us some links.
Oh, well, Matt, you can send to them the links about the classics in China. Do you remember that series?
I do remember that series, yes.
Okay. You have at least 10 subjects in that series. Confucius.
Oh, yeah, that's
Lao
actually
Tzu.
a great way to start. Yeah.
Oh,
that's on
yes,
YouTube,
I'm
right?
trying to work my way through those, but I was talking about some of the like Netflix shows or YouTube videos you were talking about.
Yeah,
what about Chinese comedy?
I don't know. I don't know
No.
about Chinese comedy. Quan probably does.
No, I don't know Chinese comedy. I can suggest you Chinese historical dramas.
But Quan just referenced the classics in China, which is a series of these wonderful productions that were done with great. I mean, it's partially stage, live audience, but such a high quality production done by the Chinese, probably sponsored by the state in some way, but it's so good. Going through the life of Confucius, the life of Lao Tzu, the life of, I mean, it's really wonderful stuff. Very, and entertaining too. I'll try to find them and send them out.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the Rising Tide lectures. Okay.
No, this is
Yes,
different.
we want links.
Okay, I'll set
No.
As a-
What Max was speaking about the production of China Global TV Network, the CVTN.
Well, that's it. It was CGTN. Yeah, I got them.
Yeah. What I wanted to say too, do you accept Star Trek as a kind of positive manifestation of modern Western culture?
I always did.
I do accept the original series as a positive manifestation.
At least an attempt. It was a good attempt.
Yeah.
And there was some irony in some of the episodes. Okay, I had some favorite episodes. Balance of Terror was a terrific episode, where the Romulans encroached upon the neutral zone, and here are two starship skippers trying to avoid an interplanetary war, but one had to live and one had to die, and it was Captain Kirk who just barely got the edge. And then there were a lot of good episodes. They hearkened to the classics. I mean, they had a episode of a civilization on clouds, and then my personal favorite one was called "A Piece of the Action," where they landed on a planet that the Federation had visited 100 years ago, left a bunch of books behind, and they found this planet looking like an episode out of the Untouchables, 1920s Chicago. And it turned out that the Torah, or their Bible for that whole civilization, was a book called Chicago Mobs of the 1920s, and every gangster had his own copy.
Yeah, that's right. They were concepts in the old series.
Yes, definitely
the Federation
worked on concepts. Well, I found a lot of the greatest mix between good and bad, or rising and falling. I think, in my opinion, you could find that in Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The
Juan,
Federation.
they're in the chat for you is Paranosomia, and I've given you, I think, a Wikipedia definition.
Okay.
I was out by one letter.
Okay.
I had para instead of paro, but somebody from Dr. Farrell's website has come to the rescue. It would have taken me a long time to find it in, I know where I could find it here, but it would have taken me a long, long time. And luckily somebody's found that before we finish today. So.
And I'm just posting a bunch of interesting Chinese videos that Quan has introduced me to, or that Cynthia's found. The ones that I have right now are all on YouTube. There's also, if you have Netflix, there's a show called The Rational Life, which is actually not bad.
I actually watched an historical drama, a Chinese historical drama that I stumbled across on a free website that I found. It was about 2.5 hours long or whatever, and I had to read all the dialogue because, of course, it's spoken in Chinese. But it was fascinating. Yeah, it was an epic, a war epic.
Yeah.
About some famous Chinese general who, with a force of about 1,000 men, fought off a force of Japanese pirates of 20,000.
Mm.
I don't know how true it is and everything like that, but there were references to the fact that it was based on history. But it was fascinating. The production was very, very good. I even found the characters, I could relate to them. And I've done that several times, Quan, the comedy aspect. It's just funny how sometimes on cable TV here, I'll stumble onto the Chinese page, the Chinese channel or whatever. And some of the comedy, it's like comedy everywhere. It's just downright funny. Sometimes given a context, whatever, and I don't care what the culture is, human behavior can be simply funny. A lot of fart jokes and things like that, but that's typical of every culture too, isn't it, for goodness sake?
Absolutely. If you
Yeah.
take the
I mean,
comedies from
I've enjoyed them. You know, I mean, I don't go looking for them necessarily. I don't watch a lot of TV these days. I haven't got time for it. I'm too busy looking at things for whatever. But every now and again, you stumble on something like that, and it's just plain fun.
To add what you said
China-
a few minutes ago, Matt, about Chinese culture rising and so forth on their social, like if you go on, like I check out WeChat, a Chinese social media app, and you go to the live streaming there, and it's a lot of cultural stuff just live streaming, like people just playing different musical instruments like the erhu, and it's very, very, is like real promotion of culture that people are very much engaged in. I was actually shocked, you know, a social media platform like that have so much going on live streaming at any time of day where people just participating and promoting their own culture and what they understand. Yeah, I mean, we really don't see that much in the West.
yeah.
Here's a simple example of that one, Jonathan. I have a friend here. He sometimes guests with the band that I play with. He's a harmonica player. I would put him up there as one of the world's best blues harmonica players. He actually won an award in Memphis a few years ago. And through him, and particularly through the guy that first introduced him to harmonica, I became aware of harmonica music throughout Asia, and particularly in China, and the harmonica orchestras. You know, where you see somebody with a harmonica that's, you know, you imagine the small harmonicas that most blues players would use. You know, these are harmonicas that are 3 foot long, you know, 3 or 4 octaves and everything like that. And when you listen to the music of a harmonica orchestra, you don't see that too much in the West. I'm sure they exist somewhere in the West, but you really don't see it. But when you see some of this Chinese stuff, it's just downright profound. Such a simple instrument. And yet, you know, in combination, and it's not always playing Western style tonal music either. It often plays Chinese classics, and the way in which, you know, these instruments can reproduce Chinese sounds, if you like. I mean, I'll give you a simple example. I was taught that in Western music, we have one word, one way of describing vibrato. And it's simply up to, you know, if you see the words VIB underneath a piece of string music, it's up to the performer to understand how to create the right kind of vibrato. But there's only one form of notation, okay? In Chinese melodic music, there are 23 different kinds of notation for vibrato. 23 different ways of going, yeah. Now, that's not something that Western ears are going to discern very, very well, but it's an intimate part of Chinese opera. When we listen to it, we don't hear that. Well, sorry, we don't hear it. We just do not hear that sort of thing and are not aware of it. But anybody who is familiar with it, and I would suggest most of the people who are familiar with it would be Chinese, there is an appreciation of the difference between 23 differences between the nuance of vibrato.
That's amazing. You've dropped
Yeah,
some
it is.
serious bombshells tonight, Paul. That's incredible.
Look, I remember when I heard that first, my jaw just hit the ground, and I did go out of my way to try and find some Chinese music. And I actually worked at a school with a Chinese teacher. And I said, can you provide me with some recordings of this sort of thing? And can you sit with me and can we listen to it and try and hear that nuance? Now, I was able to discern some things, but certainly not the way he was. Just definitely not. Definitely not. But it gave you an insight into a whole, you know, different approach to a musical aspect that we in the West, I mean, you know, the personal interpretation of vibrato, whether it be, you know, I mean, it won't be all that personal on a violin or string instruments. You are expected to do it the way you were taught, the way the composer intended, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you think of it from a vocal point of view, from the point of view of a singer, there are any number of ways that you can use vibrato as a personal expression. So there's plenty of range in Western music in terms of using vibrato. But when it comes to notating it and understanding it, we have but one way. Oh, it's just vibrato. 23 different nuances in Chinese classical music. That's just a whole different way of looking at melody.
Yeah. I would like to drop another bomb too. For people interested in the culture, the Chinese culture of the 8th century, just go to Japan, because traditional Japan is Chinese culture of the 8th century.
Yeah.
That might be considered controversial, perhaps.
Well. Depending of how the Japanese accept that they have an enormous Chinese heritage in terms of culture.
At some point, they'll have to accept that. Yes.
Yep. It's not necessarily a bad thing either.
Yeah.
Well, guys,
It's been a fun one today, hasn't it,
Yeah,
guys?
yeah,
Folks,
it's good. I
ladies and
enjoyed this.
gentlemen, it really has been. Yeah, it's been a fun one.
Indeed.
Yeah,
All right,
interesting.
so let's
I
wrap-
never, I would never have thought that reading from LaRouche would lead us down this path.
Poetic
That's amazing,
ambiguity.
eh?
That's where they get us.
Well, it's very much a collective. Very much a collective.
That's good. Well, and you know, part of me is thinking, like, in the past, I've this is not my first rodeo reading a LaRouche paper, and you know, in the past, I've often made the mistake, and I realize now it was a mistake to try to just finish the paper, and I realized that was silly because there's all sorts of points of ideas that could be born that you miss the opportunity to really just cultivate that garden and let some things just be born and see where the conversation goes, which is really what I think LaRouche intended when he wrote these compositions, was to stimulate new ideas to come into existence, not just to read his writings and finish.
Yes, absolutely.
So yeah, I'm enjoying this journey, taking our time.
100%.
Yeah, sure.
As I said to Susan before, I mean, you know, don't make the mistake of thinking that we all understand every word that we're talking about or reading about and everything like that. We're here to learn.
Yeah.
And sometimes, Susan, when you bring it back to the human level, you know, you interpret something in the text back to the human level, et cetera, et cetera. That's as profound as any ontological paradox discussion we might be having.
Well, I actually wanted to ask Matt, in doing these readings, you're actually kind of leading us through the exact same process of growth that you went through, aren't you?
I mean, I'm trying to show good things that made me better to other people, and hope that people will resonate like I resonated. Yep.
But I mean, isn't that what you were saying that you went through when you were exposed to these different writers and you were a part of these different discussion groups? That's a lot of what helped your mind to grow the way it has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, reading by myself is limited. It's important to read by yourself, but there's something very special in just having a socialized process of reading as well. That is, you just can't replicate that in any other way but just to do it and see what happens, because guaranteed everyone's different, everyone's unique, they're all bringing their own experiences to the table, and I'm going to be surprised, and I'm going to learn new things, and everyone's going to. I think the real learning process is when you're also trying to communicate thoughts within you. It's a reciprocal back and forth thing, and this is the best way to do it, I think.
I think it's that aspect of community that we have been so deprived of more and more over our lifetimes, and you are resurrecting it.
Do a little.
Yeah, let's compare today with a few weeks of lockdown.
No. But I would say that those videos would be kept for the future. So those would be the future Platonician dialogues.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
All right, guys, this is good. So yeah, let's try to do this again next week. And this Sunday we have Franz Vanderbosch, who's going to be speaking to the Rising Tide Foundation weekly meeting on China behind the scenes. No idea what he's going to do, but I'm sure it's going to be good. So that'll be. We'll put out the invitation on Friday or so.
Just a quick question too, Matthew. Is Canada in the middle of daylight saving?
No, we're on regular time.
Like 2 weeks ago, we moved our clocks. We won an hour back.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I keep expecting these sessions to start at 8 o'clock in the morning, like they did. Now they start at 9 o'clock in the morning here, so
right.
I can afford the time to wait until my wife wakes up and have breakfast with her, rather than trying to gulp it down early and then get up here and realize, oh shit, I've got an hour to wait. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ciao.
Thanks again.
Ciao,
Good night,
everybody.
everyone. Bye.
See you next week. Thanks, Matthew.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Matt.